How's it going, YouTubers? Here bringing you guys another deck profile, and today it is the first deck profile of the BT9 format. I had a lot of questions about this deck after I played it in the last video, and it is in fact the Beelstar updated deck profile for the BT9 format. I don't usually do a whole lot of deck profiles on my channel, but I felt like I'd go over this one because I had some questions about it and people seem to enjoy the deck in general. Without further ado, before we hop into the video, I do want to say thank you so much for the continued support on the channel. If you enjoy the content, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new here, hit the notification bell so you know when my videos go live, and leave any comments about the deck down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the deck profile. So to start things off, there are a few changes in this deck from the video. Mainly, I'm not running Gabumon X Antibody. I'll kind of go over that as we go through the deck and why I made the changes and what card I changed it with. But to start things off, let's go ahead and list out the eggs. We're running 5 eggs just because sometimes games can go a little bit longer with this deck. We run 4 copies of the Demi-Meramon. This is pretty self-explanatory with stuff like Gabumon and Scatter Mode. You get a whole bunch of draw on deletion, which you want them to happen. Fill up the trash, and then you have Pagumon, which basically just mills 2, again, facilitating stuff in the trash. Next, we'll get into our rookies. We're going to start off with 4 copies of Gabumon. This is, as mentioned, it's like the Demi-Meramon. It's just more draw and selective discard so you can get cards out of your hand. We run 4 to cap out on it. We run 4 copies of Gazimon. This card is very pivotal in the matchup for this meta. A lot of memory boosts going around, so this card is very, very strong. At the same time, against some decks like Alphamon, which try to make use of gaining memory via non-tamer effects, this card stops a whole lot of that. It stops the actual Alphamon or Yukin. So this card is super, super strong there. And if you can have 2 of these set up against the Alphamon or Yukin matchup, it helps a lot because unless they have certain techs like Grademon or something like that, it's hard for them to get rid of 2 Gazimon. Next, we're going to go into 3 Gazimon X Antibody. I'm only running 3 because we don't always want to Digivolve on top of our Gazimon, but early on in the game, before you really need the Gazimon on the field, especially if you have multiple Gazimon in hand, this is really good just to help fill the trash a little bit more, and then you can, of course, just Digivolve on top of it like normal because it is just a rookie. Extra draw power. Next up, we have 2 copies of Psychmon. Psychmon is just a great card to stop the mirror. It stops Dexmon. It helps against D-Reaper. Now that Luca has won an event with D-Reaper, I'm sure more and more people are going to try to hop on D-Reaper. Some people hadn't even gotten off of it, but this really helps in the matchup. We're only running 2 because usually we can fetch it back out if it gets milled or something like that with our calling, but I do like to have it just for the few scenarios where it does come up. And then the cards that I replace Gabumon with are 2 copies of Dracmon. These are really good because this helps fetches your one of Deathclaw that I have in this list that you'll see in a little bit. And if you keep on milling and you always end up milling, say, your calling, this helps get it back and it puts a body on board. Gabumon was a little mid because, yes, it helped turn on your Gabumon underneath and gave you the blue source, but you never wanted to do that on the play area because it would always whiff for you. And then you were out on being able to Digivolve on top of it into a Dobermon or something like that. So I did take it out of the list for Dracmon. Dracmon seems to be doing pretty well so far. Next, we're going into our level 4s. We're running 4 copies of course, Scatter Mode, the best card in the deck for our filter purposes. You run 4, you draw 3, you discard 2. Of course, so with the Gabumon and the perfect stack with a Gabumon and a Demi-Meramon, you end up drawing 6 cards and discarding 4 of those. Not to mention what you have in trash, so it helps fill that trash up very fast, very strong. We run 2 copies of Dobermon. A lot of lists in JP, we're running 1 copy of Dobermon, but 2 copies has been really, really strong. When it dies, you get to fetch something, so you're able to fetch any purple Digimon or Tamer. We don't run any purple Tamers, but this helps fetch us key part Digimon, like an extra way to catch our Beelstar, maybe get a Death X back out, or even just get that extra rookie back out. Say a Gazimon because you know you're about to get hit with an AO on next turn. We run 2 blockers. Blockers are super strong in this format if you can get multiple out because then they have to be able to deal with both of them. Sometimes they just get blown away, but they have to deal with them if they can't passively remove it. So I do like running 2 blockers. Good thing to come out with Nailbone, and sometimes just a Digivolve to have the body on board. And then we run the 1 promote. I used to be an advocate for 2 promote, and I'm still kind of an advocate for 2 promote, but it's hard to find room for a 2nd promote. This is just your rush target for Nailbone for game. Very strong, or if you bring something back out and Digivolve on top of it with that, that's also 1. Next up, we'll go into Beelstarmon. easily self-explanatory. This is your boss monster. This is the key thing in the deck. A lot of the times, this deck gets most of its chip damage off with its rookies early on, or something say like the scatter modes, but this is your finisher. You always want to have this because you always want to have access to it, and sometimes it's just a cheaper removal card. Instead of paying 7 cost, you can pay 4, or 4, 3, or 5, something like that, and it puts a body on board as always. Next, one of the best additions to the deck, we have 2 copies of Dexmon. This card is bonkers. As you saw in the video, they would try to go wide, hard slam a Dexmon, or Evo a Beelstar on top of a Dexmon. And then if they counter back with a Dexmon back, then they have to de-digivolve the Beelstar stays. You can just use the Beelstar to deal with the Dexmon afterwards by digivolving into a Dexmon yourself, and either de-digivolving theirs or wiping their board clear, or you just go ahead, you don't worry about the Beelstar lives or dies, it just facilitates more stuff into your deck. So Dexmon is just incredible. Sometimes this card feels a little dead when you want to hard play it, but being able to digivolve on top of Beelstar is just chef's kiss. Next, we're going to go into our Tamers first. We run 2 copies of Kyoshiro. This is basically just because he has a pretty decent ability for the deck. If you have 7 or fewer cards in hand, which you may or may not have at a certain point, you get to draw a card. But more so, he's a memory setter. He is a 4 cost, so he's not as easy to remove as, say, like a 3 cost blue tamer, and he is a blue source. So he has everything you want in a blue tamer. I like him at 2. Tried to run 3 at one point, but that felt too clunky, and even if at 2, if he goes into the trash, it's not the worst thing because your blue options, more likely, you want them to be in security or more than anything, because they're going to have protections, and if they don't have any protection effects on your turn, then you can go ahead and get rid of it with your other removal cards. We go into our 1-cost options first. We have 3 copies of Calling and 1 copy of Deathclaw. You could just run 4 copies of Calling if you really want to, but the Deathclaw has come up a decent amount. Just being able to get in there if the scatter mode doesn't die in security, or maybe any of your rookies doesn't die in security, or maybe if you don't want to risk it not dying, you can just pop it with Deathclaw to pop your opponent's Digimon, and then of course Calling is just a pivotal card, you know, being able to fetch anything back out. It fetches Death Exmon because he is a purple and black Digimon, and not white, so a very strong card. We definitely want to either run 3 or max out on it. Pick your poison. Next, we'll get into our 7-cost options. We'll start off with the first one, 4 copies of Fly Bullet. Pretty self-explanatory. A lot of level 6s in the format. We have different ways to deal with the level 7s. So Fly Bullet is just a super strong, easy removal card. It's purple. It's the main card of the deck, really. It's got Beelstar on it. What's not to love? Next up, we have 4 copies of Kakaitis Breath. This is part of the reason why we run the Blue Tamer. This is very strong because you have a decent amount of effects that keep stuff from being deleted or have its DP reduced, but if they're not running something like for Alpha or Ryukin, mainly, if they're not running something like Breath of the Gods or anything like that to deal with it, then if this is in security, this is the security bomb you need to just completely shut down that deck from doing what it wants to do by bouncing this back to the hand. Sure, it puts the thing back in their hand, but at the same time, if they've already put a bunch of resources or discarded a bunch of stuff or bottom decked a bunch of their sources, they might not be able to build up that stack like they want to. So we definitely run 4 of this because you want to see it as much as possible in security, and running 4 is the best choice. Next up, we run 3 copies of Nailbone. I don't want to run 4. I always want to see it so I can bring it back out. Sometimes it's not bad to hard play to get a memory tamer or memory blocker out, and then a blocker. So we definitely run 3 of these. 4 feels very clunky, and you don't always need 4 because you don't always need this card to finish a game sometimes. But we definitely run 3 so we can see it as much as possible. Next, we have our 1-ofs. So these are the last 3 cards of the deck. 1 of Happy Bullet Showering. I've seen people try to run 3 because this is a good way to answer a big level 7 that you may not be able to bounce back or something like that. But at the same time, if they have some of the level 7s that have protection effects, then it doesn't really do anything. And 1 usually gets in the trash fast enough, you know, unless it ends up in security or at bottom of the deck. But normally it's a good target to get and go ahead and get into the trash. The next one we have, of course, is the other 3 Musketeers option. This is Gewalt Schwarmer. This is a pretty self-explanatory one. It's another board wipe. Easy. If you don't have access to your Death X, this is a good one. If you have access to Death X and a Beelstar already on the field, then Death X most of the time is better because that can get around a few things. It can de-digivolve those high-cost level 5s down to their level 4s, and they get deleted by Death X. So that's why I only run 1 of this. And then the last but not least, in my opinion, is Howling Crusher. Howling Crusher is a very situational card. You have a lot of effects that you know, X antibody stops the source, stops itself from being stripped, so you can't strip all the sources, but in a case where you have X antibody, this strips all the other sources except for X antibody, so it'll strip everything down except the X antibody. So in that situation, you have things like, let's say a War Greymon is doing multiple checks, but it doesn't have War Greymon X, I should say, but it doesn't have any protection effects, like it doesn't have an ATP active. Well, you hit Howling, and then it strips all those Greymon protective sources, and then it hits a removal spell, and then all of a sudden, their stack is gone. This also stops Alphamon or Ryukin if they decide to go ahead and swing in before they use the effect to pass turn back. Then that strips all of their sources and then can no longer use the effect to pass turn back. Even if they do, let's say they only have an X antibody and source the option card, then they won't have to worry, then that's the only one they can bring back. So they only gain 1 memory. So this card is situational almost every single time you want it in security. And surprisingly enough, this also comes up in the armor matchup. If they don't have sources, they can't armor purge, or Magna X can't do its effect. So we run one of, you hope it's in security. Worst case scenario, it's not. You just pitch it. You get your 7 cost. So, but that is the deck. Pretty quick one. Not a lot has changed. You know, Howling Crusher has been a thing that people have been trying out last format. We just had mainly the addition of Kyoshiro, Death X, and the X Antibody Gazi or the Gabumon. I originally thought the Gabumon was good, tested it out. It worked well in that event that I posted that game of, but at the same time in future testing and from other people that have tried out the deck, they've said it not really does what they want it to do. It's kind of a brick in hand. If you're used to Yu-Gi-Oh terminology, it's a garnet in hand sometimes, because you never want to play it, and if you don't see a Gabumon, then you're kind of stuck with this dead card in hand. So when you'd rather be discarding something else, that is. But that is going to go ahead and be the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck profile. This is, in my opinion, a meta call tier 1. It is a situational tier 1. It's not always going to be tier 1 if people tech around it. You know, Avenged Kidmon is a card that almost hard shuts down the deck, but it's still viable, and it can come out and really show work. I mean, look at Card Fight King. He got 17th place at the Otakon Regionals. Shout out to you, Clay. Very, very good player. Shows that the deck can do well. Barely missing out, but I mean, you know, bubbles happen sometimes, and it's really unfortunate. He's also placed well in it in the past. So do not sleep on Beelstar. Very strong deck, very good anti-meta deck. But with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching to the end of the video. If you did enjoy the content, as always, leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're new here, hit the notification bell, leave any comments or questions you have below, and keep a lookout for more gameplay and rulings video coming up soon. Definitely plenty more BT9 rulings that I have to go over, and I can't wait to give those ones to you guys. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Later.